Sorry about that. Hello, everybody. My name is Gerardo Pizarro, and I'm going to be talking about Chapter 9, Communicative Language Teaching. This, of course, is adapted from Larson and Freeman and Anderson, 2011, our class textbook. And here we go. Before we start this chapter, I wanted to share this incredible quote by Peter Drucker. The most important thing in communication is to hear what isn't being said. I think that's really important. Now, we're gonna discuss the following. We're gonna talk about the introduction. We're gonna talk about the experience. We're gonna think about that experience. We're going to review those principles in the experience and those techniques, and then we're going to be talking about the conclusion. So we first start with the introduction, and you may have noticed that the goal of most of the methods we have looked at so far in the first 8 chapters is for students to learn to communicate in the target language. Basically in the 70s, though, educators began to question if they were going about meeting the goal in the right way. Some of them observed that students could produce sentences in a lesson, but could not use them appropriately when generally communicating outside the classroom. Now, others noted that being able to communicate required more than mastering linguistic structure due to the fact that language was fundamentally social. In short, being able to communicate requires more than linguistic competence. It requires communicative competence, knowing when and how to say what to whom. Such observations contributed to a shift in the field in the late 70s and early 80s from a linguistic structured center approach to a communicative approach. Applying the theoretical perspective of the communicate approach, we find the communicate language teaching, CLT, that aims broadly to make communicate competence the goal of language teaching. What this looks like in the classroom may depend on how the principles are interpreted and applied. This is something that Clapper said in 2003. He makes the point that because CLT lacks closely prescribed classroom techniques as compared with some of the other methods we have just looked at, CLT is kind of fussy in teachers' understanding. However, this fussiness has given CLT a flexibility which has allowed it to endure for over 30 years. This flexibility also means that classroom practices differ widely, even when teachers report that they are practicing CLT. It's probably fair to say that there is no one single agreed upon version of this CLT. We will follow our usual way of understanding the theory and associated practices by visiting a class in which a form of CLT is being practiced. The class we'll visit is one being conducted for immigrants to Canada. These 20 people have lived in Canada for 2 years and are at a high intermediate level of English proficiency. They meet 2 evenings a week for 2 hours each class. Now, in order to make this more understanding, I'm gonna go first through the experiences. We're gonna start with the teacher greeting the class. We're gonna move with all the activities from the game prediction activity, picture strict story, role play activity. Those most of them are authentic materials that the teacher is gonna use, and then we're gonna see how the class close. Now, the difference is right now we're going to be thinking about the experience at the same time that I'm going to narrate it. So, for example, the class starts with a teacher greeting. And this is the first observation that we're going to do. For example, the teacher is going to distribute a handout that has a copy of a sports column from a recent newspaper. And based on that observation, the principle is whenever possible, authentic language should be introduced. Now I gave you the example. We're going to go through all the observations from the experience. Starting again from the first one. So that teacher greeting, when the teacher greets the class, he distributes a handout. There is writing on both sides. On the sides, a copy of a sports column from a recent newspaper. The reporter is discussing the last World Cup competition. The teacher asks students to read it and then to underline the predictions the reporter makes about the next World Cup. And as we see, this alludes to the second observation. And the principle is being able to figure out the speaker's or writer's intention is part of being communicatively competent. Now, when the students have finished, they read what they have underlined. The teacher writes what they have found on the board. Then he and the students discuss which predictions the reporter feels more certain about and which predictions he feels less certain about. So some students may have said that France is gonna win the World Cup, or Spain, or Germany, or Argentina. Then the teacher asks students to look at the first sentence and to tell the class another way to express the same prediction. So all throughout the experience, we see that the teacher is giving the students direction for the activity in the target language. And the principle that is the third one is the target language is a vehicle for classroom communication, not just the object of the study. Now, each of the reporter's prediction is discussing the matter. All the paraphrases the students suggest are evaluated by the teacher and the other students to make sure they convey the same degree of certainty as the reporter originally predicted. So we go back to the four principle. One function can have many different linguistic forms. Since the focus of the course is on real language use, a variety of linguistic forms are presented together. The emphasis is on the process of communication rather than just mastery of language forms. Now, the teacher asks the students to turn to the other side of the handout. On it are all the sentences of the article they have been working on. They are out of order. Now, the teacher tells the students to unscramble those sentences, to put them in their proper order by numbering them. When they finish, the students compare what they have done with the original on the other side of the handout. So the principle here is students should work with language at the discourse of suprasternal level. They must learn about cohesion and coherence, those properties of language which bind the sentence together. The teacher then asks the students if they agree with the reporter's prediction. He also asks them to get into pairs and to write their own prediction about who will be the next World Cup champion. So now we go to the sixth observation, the game prediction. The teacher then announces that the students will be playing a game. He divides the class into small groups of 5 people each. He hands each group a deck of 13 cards. Each card has a picture of a piece of sports equipment. As the students identify the items, the teacher writes each name on the board. So the games are important because they have certain features in common with real communicative events. Also, the speaker receives immediate feedback from the listener on whether or not she has successfully communicated. Having students work in small groups maximize the amount of communicative practice they're going to receive. Now, the cards are shuffled, and 4 of the students in a group are dealt 3 cards each. They do not show their cards to anyone else. The extra card is placed face down in the middle of the group. The 5th person in each group receives no cards. She's told that she should try to predict what is that Fulano will be doing the following weekend. The 5th student is to make statements like, Fulana may go skiing this weekend. She can check her prediction by turning over the card that was placed face down. If it is the picture of the skis, then she knows that she's correct. The student seems to really enjoy playing the game. They take turns so that each person has a chance to make the predictions about how a classmate will spend his or her time. This is the seventh observation, and the principle is students should be given an opportunity to express their ideas and opinions. Now, for the next activity, we see that the teacher reads a number of predictions. Like for example, by 2030, solar energy will replace the world's reliance on fossil fuels. By 2050, people will be living on the moon. Now, the students are told to make statements about how probable they think the predictions are and why they believe so. They're also asked how they feel about the prediction. Now, in discussing one of the predictions, one student says he does not think it is like that a world government will be in place by the 22nd century. The teacher and students ignore his error and the discussion continues. Now, this is the eighth observation, and the principle is errors are tolerated and seen as a natural outcome of the development of communication skills. Since this activity was working on fluency, the teacher did not correct the student, which he will return to at later point. Now, as we continue, the teacher has the students divide into groups of three. Since there are 20 students, there are 6 groups of 3 students and 1 group of 2. One member of each group is given a pictured strip story. Now, this is the observation number 9. One of the teacher's major responsibilities is to establish situations likely to promote communication. And this is something realistic. If you use that picture strip story and you tell them what he's about to tell them, like you have to guess, predict like what's on the image, what's gonna happen next. This opens and promotes communication. Like there are 6 pictures in a column on a piece of paper, but no words. The pictures tell a story. The student with the story shows the first picture to the other members of her group while covering the remaining 5 pictures. For all of you that are interested in this particular figure and principle, you can find the page 156 on figure 9.1. Now, the other students try to predict what they think will happen in the second picture. And this is the 10th observation. And the principle is communicative interaction encourages cooperative relationships among students. It gives students an opportunity to work on negotiating meaning. For example, the teacher tells them to get into groups of 4. They are to imagine that they are really all employees of the, She then shows them the second picture and asks them to predict what the third picture will look like. After the entire series of has been shown, the group gets a new strip story and they change roles, giving the first student an opportunity to work with a partner in making predictions. Now, for the final activity the teacher gives the class, the students are told that they will do a role play. This alludes to observation number 11 that shows that the social context of the communicative event is essential in giving meaning to the utterances. They are to imagine that they are all employees of the same company. One of them is the other's boss. They are having a meeting to discuss what will possibly occur as a result of their company merging with another company. Before they begin, they discuss some possibilities together. And, the teacher then emphasizes, remember, says the teacher, that one of you in each group is the boss. You should think about this relationship. If, for example, she makes a prediction that you don't agree with. Now, these particular observation, the principle is learning to use language forms appropriately is an important part of communicative competence. And then for 10 minutes, the students perform the role play. The teacher moves from group to group to answer questions and offer any advice on what the groups can discuss. After it is over, the students have an opportunity to pose any questions. In this way, they elicit some relevant vocabulary words. They then discuss what language forms are appropriate in dealing with one's boss. And this is basically the teacher as a facilitator in setting up communicative activities and as an advisor during activities. Now, for example, the lesson, the students are to find out what they can about two political candidates running against each other in the upcoming election. This is the homework. The students are then to write their prediction of who they think will win the election and when they think so. They will read these to their classmates at the start of the next class. So students should be given opportunities to work on language as it is used in authentic communication. Now we're going to our number 4, reviewing the principles. Now, the answer to our 10 questions, the following 10 questions, will help us come to a better understanding of CLT. In some answers, new information has been provided to clarify certain concepts. Now, the first question is, what are the goals of teachers who use CLT? So the goal is to enable students to communicate the target language. However, we know that communication is a process. Knowledge of the forms of language is insufficient. Students need knowledge of the linguistic forms, meanings, and functions. Many different forms can be used to perform a function. Single form can often serve a variety of functions. To be able to choose from among the most appropriate form, given the social contents and the roles of interlocutors, be able to manage the process of negotiating meaning with their interlocutors. Now, the second question, what is the role of the teacher and what is the role of the student? So, very plain and simple. Teachers are facilitators and they have a more passive role, while students are the communicators and they have a more active role. Now, if we go deep into it, the teacher facilitates communication in the classroom, acts as an advisor, notes error for later, and acts as a co-communicator. Now, the role of the student, he is actively engaged in negotiating meaning and is responsible for their own learning. Now, in the third question, what are some characteristics of the teaching and learning process? So the main characteristic of the CLT is everything that is done with a communicative intent. If we both know today's Tuesday, and this is for the information gap. If we both know today's Tuesday and I ask you, what is today? And you answer Tuesday, our exchange is not really communicative. So this is a perfect sample of not being able to use CLT because there's no communication, so it's irrelevant. And again, also the information gap. When one person is in an exchange who knows something the other person does not. However, in communication, the speaker has a choice of what you will say and how you will say it. If the exercise is tightly controlled so that students can only say something in one way, the speaker has no choice and the exchange, therefore, is not communicative. Now, if the listener does not have an opportunity to provide the speaker with such feedback, then the exchange is not really communicative. Another characteristic of CLT is the use of authentic materials. And we noted that activities in CLT are often carried out by students in small groups. Now, our fourth question, what is the nature of student-teacher interaction? And what is the nature of student-student interaction? So the teacher may present some part of the lesson. However, he is the facilitator of the activities, but he does not always himself interact with students. Remember, he assumes a more passive role. Now, the students interact a great deal with one another. They do this in various configurations, pairs, trials, small groups, and whole groups. Remember, the student has a more active role. Now we go to our following fifth question. How are the feelings of the students dealt with? One of the basic assumptions of CLT is that by learning to communicate, students will be more motivated to study another language since they will feel they are learning to do something useful. Okay. And then teachers give students an opportunity to respect their individuality. Now, our sixth question, how is the language view? How is culture view? Language is for communication. Linguistic competence, the knowledge of forms and their meanings, is only one part of communicative competence. Another aspect of communicative competence is knowledge of the functions that language is used for. Therefore, the learner needs knowledge of forms and meanings and functions. However, to communicative competence, she must also use this knowledge and take into consideration the social situation in order to convey her intended meaning in a more appropriate way. Now, culture is the everyday lifestyle of people who use the language. There are certain aspects of it that are especially important to communication. The use of nonverbal behavior, for example, which might receive greater attention in CLT. Now, the next question, what is the role of the student's native language? So the student's native language, and I put L1, is permitted in CLT. Nonetheless, whenever possible, the target language should be used not only during communicative activities, but also for explaining the activities to the students or in assigning homework. And this is basically the target language, the L2, if, he's learning she or he or whatever he's learning the second language. Now, how is evaluation accomplished? So a teacher evaluates not only his students' accuracy, but also their fluency. A teacher can evaluate his students' performance informally in his role as advisor or in his role as a co-communicator. Now, for a final question, how does the teacher respond to student errors? Errors, like we previously said before, foreign are tolerated during fluency-based activities and are seen as a natural outcome of the development of communication skill. The teacher may know the errors during fluency activities and return to them later with an accuracy-based activity. So now we're approaching and we're gonna review those techniques. Now remember, there may be aspects of CLT that you find appealing. This review has not been provided in the event you wish to try to use any of the techniques or material associated with CLT. Before we talk about these authentic materials that we saw the teacher use in the experience. Now, to overcome the typical problem that students cannot transfer what they learn in the classroom to the outside world, and to expose students to a natural language in a variety of situations, adherents of CLT advocate the use of authentic language materials. We see that the teacher in the experience uses a newspaper article. He also assigns the students homework, requiring that they learn about two political candidates who are running for election. For students with lower proficiency in the target language, in that L2, it may not be possible to use authentic language materials such as these. Simpler authentic materials like the use of a weather forecast when working on predictions, or at least ones that are realistic, are most desirable. Now, in the scramble sentences, and we saw this in the picture strip story. So the students are given a passage, a text, in which the sentences are in a scrambled order. They are told to unscramble the sentences so that the sentences are restored to their original order. This type of exercise teaches students about the cohesion and coherence properties of language. In addition to written passages, students may also be asked to unscramble the lines of a mix-up dialogue, or they might be asked to put the pictures of a picture strip store in order and write lines to accompany those pictures. In the language games, Games are used frequently in CLT. The students find them enjoyable, and if they are properly designed, they give students valuable communicative practice. Games that are truly communicative, according to Morrow, have the three features of communication: information gap, choice, and feedback. And remember, we talked about these before, but now we're gonna go and see them on a little bit deeper. So many activities can be done with picture strip stories. In the activity, we observe one student in a small group was given a strip story. An information gap existed. The students in the group did not know what the picture contained. They had a choice as to what their prediction would be and how they would word it. They received feedback, not on the form, but on the content of the prediction by being able to view the picture and compare it with the prediction. Now, in role play, and this is something that we find in chapter 6, and I believe Hosian did a brilliant job in his presentation. So we already encountered the use of role plays as a technique when we look at that method. Role plays are very important in CLT because they give students an opportunity to practice communicating in different social contexts and in different social roles. Now we come to our final part, the conclusions. And basically, perhaps the greatest contribution of CLT is asking teachers to look closely at what is involved in communication. If teachers intend students to use the target language, L2, then they must truly understand more than grammar rules and target language vocabulary. Now here I gave you guys some reflective questions in case you want to adapt CLT. And also if you want to dig deeper in CLT. And also as you know, as a fun activity, you can go to page 170 and do the activity A and B. If there's no more questions, then thank you so much for listening, and I hope you really enjoyed this presentation on chapter 9.